One of the most challenging questions to the conception of any movie is, how do you end a movie? How do you end a movie without the "and they lived happily ever after" or the classic walking off into a sunset? How do you make a movie end satisfyingly, considering that most people's reaction to and impression of your movie will greatly be influenced by its ending? Does an ending need to be satisfying? To answer these questions, I want to look at what is, to me, one of the best endings in cinema history, Mike Nichols' 1967 The Graduate. There's no plot twist, there's no happily ever after, there's not even dialogue.
Hello darkness, my old friend, I've come to talk with you again, because a vision softly creeping left its seeds while I was sleeping, and the vision that was planted in my brain still remains within the sound of silence. In restless dreams
To explain this scene and its impact, we're going to need a bit of context. Let me introduce you to The Graduate the way I was introduced to it. It's a movie about a young guy getting out of college who, going through an identity crisis, starts an affair with an older woman. Some scenes are iconic, brilliantly composed, and paced with the incredible music of Simon and Garfunkel. However, this introduction is pretty misleading to say the least. After watching the movie, you quickly realize that the affair with Mrs. Robinson, which was supposed to be the whole plot of the movie, was actually inconsequential. Alright, it might not be completely inconsequential, but it's definitely not the main theme of the movie. Benjamin Braddock just returned home from college. He's an award-winning scholar, all the adults around him are happy and proud of him, but something's wrong. Ben isn't happy. He says he worries for his future. He doesn't really know what he's doing, where he's going. If anything, he doesn't see his graduation as a success because he doesn't know where it's going to bring him and if he even wants to get there in the first place. He's completely alienated. He doesn't know what he wants, he doesn't know where he's going, and he doesn't know if he should be happy about it or not. He's scared. He feels completely powerless as everything in his life changes rapidly without him feeling like he has any control over it. So, what is The Graduate really about? I believe it's about a man who has no agency, a man for whom his future and his life has been shaped for him by his parents, shaped for him by rigid norms and standards, shaped for him by social expectations. In comes Mrs. Robinson, a friend of the family, a strong, confident woman. She's in control, she knows what she wants, she's the antithesis of Ben. Early in the movie, she disrupts Ben's life by flirting with him. He resists because he's a polite man who would never have an affair with a married woman who shares her age with his own mother. He resists because, well, that's expected of him. But after thinking about it, he sleeps with Mrs. Robinson, an experience which he'll repeat all throughout the summer and which will deeply transform him. Through this rebellious action with Mrs. Robinson, Ben feels somewhat freed from the social expectations that held him down. However, the very middle of the movie marks a pretty radical break in Ben's development. After starting a conversation with Mrs. Robinson, a seemingly strong and confident lady, he realizes that she hasn't figured things out as adults pretend they do. She admits not being into art, although that was her passion in college. She admits not liking her husband and explains how she got stuck in a marriage with him after falling pregnant with her daughter. Mrs. Robinson isn't happy, and for all intents and purposes, we can assume that her life was chosen for her, embodying the very thing Ben feared. In that conversation, she orders Ben to not date her daughter, something Ben's parents and Mr. Robinson have been pushing for. And as you can expect, Ben goes on a date with the young Elaine Robinson, falls in love, and the second half of the movie is dedicated to their relationship. Mrs. Robinson, being clearly upset by this turn of events, pushes Ben into admitting to Elaine that he's been sleeping with her mother, making their love impossible. After problematic insistence and downright harassment, Ben disrupts Elaine's wedding at the end of the movie, runs away with her, and they both hop on a bus to escape the Robinson family. Cut to the end scene. The Graduate could have easily resolved Ben's alienation by saying that through his rebellious action, he was able to reaffirm himself, take his fate into his own hands, and live the life he wanted. But that's not the case. The whole conflict which motivated the movie's plot was Ben's alienation, and when we expect this conflict to be resolved, it doesn't. It's still looming, it's there in Ben's face. These few seconds are powerful. These few seconds were set up by almost 2 hours of character development. These few seconds are what this whole movie is about. At the beginning of the movie, Ben feels alienated after spending countless hours performing in school and doubting if he actually wanted it in the first place and where to go from there. The feeling is identical with his relationship with Elaine. In the bus, he doesn't even look at her. He's looking forwards with the same dissociated stare he had at the beginning of the movie. So, what does this tell us about Ben's alienation? I want to focus on one extremely important aspect of alienation, the one which Ben is affected by the most. He doesn't feel in control. We don't know the motivations as to why he enrolled in college, but we can assume it was partly due to many external pressures, partly parental and social. And this, in a way, creates an identity for him. He is the graduate. He is the man of the hour at the beginning of the movie, yet he obviously doesn't want to be. He isn't comfortable with the identity people choose for him. It makes him feel like he's someone he's not. It makes him feel trapped. It makes him feel alienated. Ben feels like he lost agency over his actions, his future, and himself. Through conquering Elaine, however, by defying the adults who have decided what he should and shouldn't do, by doing what he wants or what he thinks he wants, he believes he can regain his agency. He will not let Elaine's parents decide for him. He won't let Elaine decide for him. She can say no to him how many times she wants. He will not take no for an answer because he is in control of his life. He decides how his life will be and who he'll live it with. This rebellion, the one that was supposed to free him from alienation, is unsuccessful. We'll never know what goes on in Ben's head, what made him realize that he failed his attempt to free himself from alienation, but here are 3 possible thoughts. Number 1, he realizes he never really wanted Elaine. After all, he falls in love with her after only 1 date and admitted not really knowing her before. There's also the whole problem where he slept with her mother multiple times, triggered her parents' divorce, which some might argue was inevitable anyway, stalked her, harassed her, and embarrassingly crashed her wedding. Perhaps he realizes that he wasn't in love with Elaine, but was more in love with the idea that he could conquer Elaine, evidence to him of his power and agency. Secondly, he realizes that his love for Elaine was also determined for him, and what he thought was rebellion was actually conformity. Ben obviously doesn't know what he wants for himself or for his future. All he's been doing is that which is expected of him. Go to college, perform, entertain the guests at his party, drive Mrs. Robinson back home, refuse her seduction. The next step that was expected of him was to find a girl, get married, go to graduate school, and find a decent job, have kids, etc. Ben might be realizing here that he's taking the steps that are expected of him to find a girl and marry her without really knowing if he wants to find a girl and marry her. He's really adamant about marriage, but barely knows the girl, which is partly a product of how marriage functioned in the 60s, but also shows that he wants to marry her because that's expected of him. He thought he regained agency, but conquering Elaine, who did he do it all for? Certainly not himself. Thirdly, and this is my favorite one, he realizes that he has become Mrs. Robinson. He realizes that, just like her, he's not happy, he feels alienated, and he's trying to regain agency through an act of rebellion. Mrs. Robinson hates her life. She feels stuck, and she can feel power and agency by cheating with her husband, by sleeping with a younger man. Ben knows Mrs. Robinson's transgression didn't bring her happiness or agency, and he's realizing that the same is happening to him. It's very hard, if not impossible, to escape social expectations, mainly because these expectations are not always clearly defined. We don't always know what is expected of us, and the line is very thin between what we want and what is wanted for us. Does Ben actually want to sleep with Mrs. Robinson, or does he want it because it's expected of him to want to sleep with a hot, older woman? Does Ben actually want to get married to Elaine, or does he want it because it's expected of him to marry someone? These questions can sometimes be very difficult to answer and even more difficult to ask. How do we know what we really want versus what we're expected to want? For example, when I was young, I was told and I was convinced that I loved sports, and I genuinely believed it until later in life I realized I never did. Some of you at home might think of situations with a romantic partner, for example, where you really thought you loved them until later you realized you never did. Or maybe you did at one point, but you didn't love them anymore, and you were convincing yourself that you were because that was expected of you. Like I said, these are questions that are harder to ask than they are to answer because they make you question everything you want and desire. Do I want a relationship? Do I want kids? Do I want a career? Do I want friends? Do I want money? Do I want fame? Do I want to sleep with my neighbor? Do I want to party? Do I want to like sports? Do I want to go to the restaurant? There might be an infinite amount of desires to question, and sometimes maybe to you some answers are quite obvious, but these answers are the ones that deserve the most questioning. You need to question the desires you take for granted. The Graduate definitely doesn't give any answers and certainly doesn't ask any questions. What it's doing is forcing you to ask questions, not about what you want, but about what you think you want. If you think you're absolutely certain of what you want, think twice. Benjamin Braddock did too. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for liking and subscribing if you have already. And I'd like to thank, as always, all my patrons for supporting the channel. If you also want to support the channel and be in the credits of all these videos, check out patreon.com/thecanvas.